Oh, here we go. We're here.
Good morning. A little late, as we know. We've had the elections. Alex is back joining us. Martin is on a train somewhere, and hopefully will be joining us if he survives the tender mercies of whichever train company is taking him. But the elections are over, and we've had a triumphant victory for the party that will bring peace, joy, love, jelly tots, and free apple pie to everybody. No,
Is that
so
reform?
sorry,
Sounds like
no.
reform to me.
No. It will be the David Landing Cole party. Um, but no, in all seriousness, welcome, Alex. It's lovely to have you back on the show. We've got two MP candidates. I will get the people who ran for Parliament. Um, as you can probably tell, that it's 20 to 8 in the morning, and they're listening to me. They were regrettably unsuccessful in their seats in their campaigns. But we've got an opportunity to talk to them today. So, have you both recovered from the election?
The answer for me is no. I had just about recovered yesterday, and I went to a gig until 1 o'clock in the morning, and so I'm quite tired again. But it was the most profoundly exhausting thing I've ever done in my life, and I don't think I'm quite physically or mentally recovered yet. Because you do, it's really weird that you spend. Well, for me, it was only 6 weeks, yeah, but for Alex, it was more like a year. But you spend 6 weeks thinking about nothing else and doing nothing else, and suddenly it disappears, and you're left with this physical exhaustion and also a big void in your life as well. And so I'm just trying to rediscover who I am actually, and think about what I used to think about, or try to remember what I used to think about before the election campaigns. How are you feeling, Alex?
Well, I know, like you sent me a message a few days ago saying if I recovered after the elections. And to be honest, like, yes, I know it sounds very strange, but I basically on Thursday at the on the polling day and the count, I was like really unwell. By this I mean like really unwell, not because of the count or the election stress, just because of like, physically unwell. Sometimes I get this way. And then on Friday, I actually did have a day off, like, just recovered a bit of sleep. On Saturday, I was back at it, just catching up with friends. I didn't have time to catch up in the elections. And on Monday at like 7 a.m., I was awake. I went to London to work and so on. So, like, for me, it's really back to normal. I actually thought, like, one of the advantages, like, of me being in politics and, like, not only, like, being a candidate, but, like, organizing campaigns as well, is because, in a lucky or unlucky way, since I was 18, really, and I started to work, I had different jobs. I always had very long days. I always worked very unusual work patterns in terms of like times. So I think because I never had like a 9 to 5 and a normal work life balance, like it doesn't really affect me in the same way it affected many friends who are like, oh my god, like I had like those 16-hour days of campaigning. I mean, yeah, of course, you do feel tired, but I think if I guess your brain is used to like having long days at work and not really having that balance, which you should have, by the way, then you get you recover quite quickly after. That's fair to say.
I think you also have the advantage of age because you're a lot younger than me, and when you get older, it takes longer to recover from everything as well. So perhaps that
Yeah,
helps.
definitely. I think you do need more of the, time for yourself and work-life balance, like depending, like I think you have a lot more energy as well. Like, I actually found like if I was running this probably 10 years ago, I'll have done even more. But yeah, I know we will be speaking about some of the, like, I guess, untruths and myths around the election candidates. But like one of the things that I found really surprising is when some people ask me like, oh, so you didn't spend like, a few months only on this? And I'm like, no, I still had to go to council meetings, I still had work, I still have to pay my bills and so on. So this kind of assumption that all the candidates, I mean, of course some candidates take time off, and that's fair enough, especially if you have that leave at work. But I think for most candidates, unless you run for like a seat which you are kind of 100% sure you're going to win, like I think most people do balance, work with, other counselor commitments, with other meetings, and other life commitments in general. So it's not really like running a full-time campaign in that sense.
Well, yeah, I used all my vacation up at the start of the campaign, and I had to do it early because as my own agent, I had to do all the logistic stuff. And so the stuff that really hurt me at the start was getting all the print stuff done. Because in the 6 weeks campaign, starting from scratch, for me, you had a big team of volunteers, which you'd already pulled together. And I'm sure you augmented during the campaign. But for me, when Rishi Sunak stepped out of Downing Street in the rain, there was me and 2 friends who said they'd support me and had to start from scratch. And so at that stage, and I was also had to go to Germany on business for in the first week. So it was frantic trying to get my leaflets written, organized, printed, hitting the Royal Mail deadline, which I think was quite difficult. So, the Royal Mail will send out a leaflet to every single, they're supposed to send out a leaflet to every address. I don't think that actually happened in reality because the number of reports I've got of missing leaflets. But getting that print work done and on time and ahead of the postal deadline was really hard work, and we managed to do that. And I don't think lots of the political parties managed to do that. Certainly, Labour around here didn't get their leaflets out until the last week of the campaign. So, yeah, that kind of logistical stuff. So you end up in a 6 weeks period, sprinting into the start of it, and then having no energy left at the end, which was my experience. Hi, Martin. Where are you today?
Good morning. I'm in Cambridge. I'm in the centre, just around the back of the station somewhere.
Are you trying to do a different location every week? We've had you in your car. We've had you every week. Yeah, like our roving reporter at the moment.
Well, I'm just praying for no rain at the moment. So, yeah, there's a bit of that at the moment. I might be back at home next week. I always my home venue's more interesting, to be fair.
Those clouds look ominous behind you as well, so you might get wet.
Yeah. So we were just saying about the things like the Royal Mail leaflet and so on. And you still have to pay for it. You still have to produce it for yourself. They will just deliver one. One of the things is I don't think people necessarily know how elections work or how the process around elections work. Obviously, people know you go and put your X in a box on the ballot paper. And that's it. But then there's all the process around it, particularly from the point of view of candidates and political parties and so on. So I thought it might be interesting to talk about that. What do you three think are the biggest misconceptions about elections?
Well, I think like for me, the biggest misconception is the fact that some people assume all the candidates do this as a full-time thing, and including some people who think it's a paid thing as well. And that kind of links to some expectations that people have as well. So for example, of course, in an election campaign, as Stephen will know and Martin will know, you get a lot of emails, and of course, as a candidate, you try to respond to as many as possible, but often those become impossible, especially if you're not doing this full-time. And even if you're doing this full-time in some areas, especially the campaigns are very active, you can have like hundreds or thousands of emails during a campaign. And I think that's an assumption that I got, some people being it's something I get in council as well. Some people who get upset being like, oh, I waited 2 days for your response, or follow up straight away. And I have to be honest and explain look, I still have a job and I still have this other thing to do, and I'm trying to get back to you as soon as possible, but I just cannot physically manage the amount of correspondence without having stuff. And I think that's something that I get sometimes in council. It's very, very few people, but often I will get some resident saying, emailing me the next day saying, why haven't you replied, or following up with a phone call. And you always have to be, of course, polite and understanding, because I got this assumption many times saying oh, I thought that's your full-time job, being a counselor and just doing, emails and casework all day. Or some people confuse as well the role of a counselor with the role of an MP, and thinking you have an entire staff team to do your casework and emails as well, which obviously is not the case. So that's one of the misconceptions which I found interesting in the campaign.
And you do literally get hundreds of emails a week, because there's all these websites now where you can get your prospective parliamentary candidate or parliamentary candidate to pledge to different things. So assisted dying. There's one saying, will you stand up for cats? And the only time I've ever stood up for cats was during the second half of the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, when I walked out, because and so you get hundreds of these, and you can't respond to all of them. I mean, you try to, and some of them want very specific pledges. So there's lots of Palestinian ones, which I kind of agreed with in principle, most of it. But some of the specific things they're answering, thinking, I'm not signing up to that. you know. And so I tried to answer loads of those, and those are actually quite a good vote winning, because actually I think so few of the candidates ever respond to them that if you do respond to them, quite often people will say they'll vote for you, or at least they'll say they'll vote for you. So that kind of dealing with that email traffic, God knows what state my council on work emails are in. It's impossible.
That's even more difficult when you're standing and you're representing a political party as well, because a lot of them, they're asking you to sign pledges that sort of go against what your party's saying. And as an individual, you might sort of agree with that. But actually, by publicly putting out something that says, I do agree with it, you're opening the door to yourself a little bit as well. I remember in 2010, I signed I had same as you guys when I stood for Parliament in 2010. Loads of these coming through, and one of them was the tuition fees pledge, and it's something I felt quite strongly about at the time, about not increasing tuition fees, and I signed it, and I got in a bit of trouble for it. But I just said, look, there are 95% of these, 99% of these. I'm just, I'm going to reply and just say, look, I'm not committing myself or whatever. That one I actually signed up to, and I got into a bit of trouble for.
Yeah. So on the misconception thing, I think the biggest misconception is, well, that somehow that somebody's paying us to do this as well. So if you're a candidate from a party that's in a target seat, you get quite a lot of funding, I think, from your head office. But for me, most of I fund it myself basically. So in order to print 50,000, I printed 75,000 leaflets and signs and banners and things, and that cost me about 10 grand. So you have it depends on the constituency size, but the spending limit for the campaign is about 20 grand, and so I've spent about half of that. And actually, when I put my return in, I'll have to include some of the pro bono work people did for me on design, which has slated me on designing my leaflets and laying out my leaflets, which will probably push it up to 13, 14, 15. But, the political parties will be spending 20, but they'll also get like national level funding, and also lots of these, so Lib Dems especially, were campaigning well before the election. So wherever I spend like 10 grand of my own cash, I think that Ian Sollum, who won, must have spent in excess of 50 across the whole long campaign. So that, for most of us, it's coming out, or lots of us, it's coming out of our pockets. And some campaigns are a lot less well resourced than others, which is an uneven playing field, I guess.
And the thing is, if you are, the funding you might get from a party is going on campaign things, not paying your electric bill, for instance. It's still that's the thing. So I do agree with it. Cats is the only musical I've walked out of.
Yeah, it's rotten. I mean, there's some banging tunes, but
No, it was. I really, and I've seen a lot of musicals, and it's literally the only one I've walked out of. So I thought it was terrible.
Is this hot topic of the day? Is it?
Yeah. There's no storyline. That's the problem.
But no, I mean, so I mean, and listen, I'm just a town councillor, and I've had people saying, sometimes say, "Oh, why haven't you replied to me?" And it's like, well, because you emailed me the day before yesterday with the best will in the world. Sometimes it takes me longer to get back to people. And anyway,
I used to, when I was mayor of St. Neots, I used to get people ringing me up on a Sunday morning saying, "Am I through to the mayor's office?" And it was just me in bed, and like, this is the mayor's office, and I'm in bed.
The best one I had one when I was mayor of Huntingdon. Someone called asking if I was the coroner. And it was, I mean, so they lost someone and didn't know what to do, and they assumed they called the mayor.
Yeah.
Maybe in France. But anyway, so there's that misconception. One of the other ones that people get is, how did you get my name when you're writing to everyone? So Alex, Martin, and Stephen, how did you get my name?
I can so basically there's the whole process of becoming a candidate, and so at the start of the 6 weeks, none of us were official candidates, because you have to get your paperwork. You have to get at least 10 people to support you, and and a witness and a seconder, and so in the first weeks of the campaign, you don't have access to the to the electoral roll until I had the electoral roll before I put my paperwork in. I think it was we had to wait until Parliament was dissolved, and as soon as Parliament was dissolved that day, we were allowed to write off and get a copy of the name and address of every single registered voter in the constituency. And these, like in previous elections, have had that in a PDF file, which is useless. These days, you get it in a like an Excel spreadsheet, which was easier to use. So you get a copy of everybody's name and address. And not all of them can vote in the election as well, because some of them are overseas electors. So some people can vote. Alex is an expert on this, but some people who are not British citizens can vote in local elections, but unfortunately can't vote in general elections. And so working with that spreadsheet is a big part of being a candidate, I think, because ultimately you have to try and leaflet all of those people.
Yeah, definitely. That's something where like being a party political candidate helps, because you should have like the party systems, which makes it easy to separate, let's say, EU citizens who can vote in local elections from people who can vote in general. But it's probably even more difficult working out all those spreadsheets yourself without having
not for me.
without having those. Not for you, because you're good at spreadsheets, but like if you are other independent candidates might find it difficult, like but on a serious note, the data work involved to be able to run an effective campaign, that's what often makes the difference between like seats that are won and seats that are not won. And like obviously if you're not in a target seat or don't have resources or you're an independent, it's more difficult for you to like do that kind of very targeted campaigning.
And I think people don't sort of understand the degree that it's not just that you get as a party candidate, it's not just that you get a copy of the electoral roll. It's that the systems that you're using are giving you a lot more data than that. What they're doing is telling you where your likely voters are. So more and more in elections, if you get somebody knocking on your door, it's because they think you might vote for them, and they've got a spreadsheet that says your demographics say you might vote for that person, or it might be a previous canvassing return, and understanding sort of that level of technical data as well. I tried to do, obviously failed miserably for a district council seat, but then never mind that. I tried to do something similar, which is look at some demographics really, and look at where certain core votes might be within my ward. But I used sort of slightly different stuff, and I didn't obviously have the hokey pokey that the that the big parties have. But that's a part of it as well. People understanding that the reason nobody knocks on your door is because you're a nailed on party voter, or because you're the profile says you're never ever likely to vote for them. And there's some people in the middle there, which can be and tend to be where a lot of people will focus where the door knocking is.
And I have none of that, so I've just got a list. I've just got a list of electors. So there's about 75,000 people in a constituency, and for us, we had about 50,000 different addresses. And so, actually, lots of the work was working out how many leaflets you have to print for the Royal Mail drop and for each of your drops. And that's if you're a party candidate. I mean, I was just leafleting every door, independent whether people on the electoral roll or not, because I just didn't. Well, I don't have time to check, so it's easier for me to overprint on my leaflets and just deliver one to every house, which is what I was trying to do. So we got out 50,000 to the Royal Mail, although I'm not convinced all of those were delivered. That's done for free, but you have to print them all. And then I delivered another 25,000 kind of targeted leaflets to different communities with different messagings on as well. So 75,000 leaflets in 6 weeks starting from scratch, I think was a massive achievement. And you have to get those out quicker than 6 weeks as well, because ideally you want everybody to see at least one of your leaflets before the postal votes land, which is about 4 weeks into the campaign, Alex, something like that. There's a date when those land, and you want to try and time your communications for that. And I think political parties do even more. You sometimes deliver on the day that the postal votes drop. There's all sorts of kind of campaign voodoo magic which people think work, and I didn't have the resources to do.
The postal votes thing, obviously only standing as a district councillor, but the postal votes thing, so what I did was try and get every door to get a leaflet either the day before or the day that postal votes hit. I think that's it's really, really important, because the turnout for postal voters is really, really high.
And so after that day, that your campaign effectiveness decreases by about 20%, because 20% of people are already voted. So yeah, there's fewer votes to be had, which is why you have to do lots of that campaigning up front. It doesn't stop you, of course, but
bring up something, because the postal votes, at least there was a day we were expecting the postal votes to land in Huntingdonshire, and mine did, but a lot of people didn't get them for some time afterwards. Question here from Caroline, friend of mine. So many of the overseas postal votes either didn't arrive in time to return or still haven't arrived. Not everyone can use a proxy. What can be done to make it fit for purpose for overseas voters? The same happened with the referendum. It's a major issue. Democracy isn't happening. So how do you reckon that can be fixed?
I think it's probably a consequence of austerity, and everything's pared back to the minimum. So I think lots of the postal voters in the UK claim they didn't get. So the post office here isn't working properly. Yeah, I mean, and that's not down to individual post people, because they're fantastic and they work really hard, but the whole service doesn't work. So that was a big issue in the UK. Overseas, I guess that's councils sending them out in time, because actually it's district councils or city councils around here who send out all the postal votes on behalf of the government. And I guess, they're pared back to a minimum. And I guess overseas post offices aren't working as well. So, I don't really trust the post, especially after this, because it's not very reliable. And so that's the difficulty, I think, is postal services.
The overseas postal services is probably, in terms of overseas voters, is probably the bigger factor. I mean, my son out in China, it was really hit and miss whether he got any post at all when he was out there. And I remember he got his Christmas presents that we posted in November, beginning of November. He got them in July.
Yeah,
and if you. How do we deal with that? The only way you can deal with it is to do things electronically, and I don't think we have the capability, or nor do I think we should have the will to do something electronically either. But so that's the only way you could do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very skeptical about electronic voting, because you have to have confidence in the system, and people are. It's easier to have confidence in the system if you've got a big pile of pieces of paper that you can go, you can go and check again. With the electronic things, that's not necessarily the case. Another thing from Caroline: is it true that postal votes for overseas are not allowed to be sent out more than 2 weeks before? That's what people are being told. Luckily, I get mine sent to my UK address so I could vote. I think it's probably a case of, I don't know, but it's how long it takes to process it, because you only get the candidates. You can't do anything until the candidates are announced.
6 weeks is too short. I think that I can just talk on this, because So all right, let's. I might have sounded a bit critical before, but big shout out to the district council. So around here, for me and Alex and I, it was Huntingdonshire District Council. Yeah. District councils are not overly resourced organisations, and from the moment that election, I mean, I was at the council the day the election was announced, and well, they can't stop, but everything it's a massive logistical operation, and it's all like all the leave was cancelled, and people. There was one lady, I think it was either in South Cambs or I think it was in South Cambs, who had Glastonbury tickets but couldn't go. People have to cancel their holidays.
Bonus.
It's a full on effort for district councils to do this, and they're geared up. And I think having heard on anecdotally, lots of people ring up and complain, because I'm in charge of the contact centre at HTC as well. Ring up and complain, but 9 times out of 10 it's because they haven't actually registered for a postal vote, or they haven't done the right, or not even registered to vote. Even on election day, it's crazy. So I think the district councils do a massive job. Firstly, organising all of the votes, but also organising all of the counts as well, which we can maybe talk about in a bit.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we had people in Finland that had to give up leave for the general election as well, and I take my hat off to them, because that must hurt first of all, but the approach that they take to dealing with candidates and things like that is amazing as well, and it's something need to remember. It's not just that their engagement with candidates is not just at the count. It's the opening of the postal votes and stuff like that, where they have to put up with people like me staring at them, and to deal with that, I think is I take my hat off to them, because I wouldn't want it.
Can I give a big shout out to Andrew Francis as well? So Alex's count, everything was organised by HTC. Mine was across the border in South Cam. So Andrew Francis and his team were absolutely delightful in dealing with me as a rookie candidate with no support and making all the mistakes you could possibly make. They were so kind and so generous and so responsive that it made it, that bit of it was relatively easy to do because they were so fantastic. So yeah, big shout out to South Cams and HTC because they were both brilliant for this election, I think.
Yeah. And Lisa Jablonska
and
Fenton for Martin, of course.
Yeah.
No, Fenland were absolutely great with me, and I don't, and everything was organised really well at Fenland. I can't knock it, to be honest, despite the result.
I think there's a point as well around the resources or the lack thereof that councils have, especially with election acts changing constantly. So like one of the things like I was discussing a few months back is about, like how with the Elections Act, now you have to remove at some point, probably before the next elections, unless the legislation changes somehow, the EU citizens who arrived post-Brexit who can vote in local and not national. So I think there's so many different changes, like through those acts of parliament that like put even more capacity pressure on councils in terms of their elections team, in addition to organizing all those elections. And now so many councils across the UK as well, having to deal with by-elections because of so many different surprise wins. So I think there's like actually a lot of work that's not necessarily very well resourced. And like I think some councils have it like a bit better in terms of funding arrangements, but like I, in my, outside of politics job, like doing work on democratic rights, like I speak to a lot of different council representatives across the UK, and it's like a concern in terms of like, kind of constantly changing the legislation, what this involves in terms of, the pressure on the electoral services in general. So that's kind of like a side point, but relevant point.
See, I just put this up from Caroline. There's a lot of very dedicated local government workers who have really put in a lot of work, not least the people who stay up till 3 a.m. and do it on the count and really hope that it's not so close that there's a recount.
4 o'clock for us, 4 a.m. for us.
Yeah,
but you've also got to remember a lot of those people that are at that count until sort of 4 a.m. They're opening polling stations at 7 a.m. as well. So it's not just it's it's effectively a 24-hour day for some of those people.
Yeah, no, it's really long. It's really long. It's hard. The other one I wanted to address because it came up was tellers at polling station. So when you go to vote, quite often there will be representatives of political parties at the polling stations. Why are there representatives of political parties at polling stations?
It tends to be in the areas where you have a lot of volunteers or a targeted campaigning, or you actually can spare the capacity on that. So actually, it's a very interesting question because some people ask like, oh, why there are like lots of tellers in Cambridge City in all the elections, but not so many in rural areas, for example, although in some there are. And I think the question around that is purely capacity because, again, people are volunteering to do those roles. And like it usually depends how you organize your campaign. And if you have a very limited number of volunteers, you might choose to say everyone, door knocks and like no one is doing telling. But I think the telling is very helpful if you have the capacity in the campaign because you basically can feed back on who has voted already. And this means that you won't bother people again, knocking them up again, door knocking them and saying, have you voted yet? If you know they have voted. But that's kind of my perspective on it.
If it was up to me, I'd ban them because I think that it's done so badly and they break so many rules. Because you're not allowed to campaign in or around polling stations, but you get these people who quite often are overstepping the mark. So I know at my polling station, and I didn't, but my son, they were one of the tellers for none of our parties. Well, I don't have one. Was basically asking people for their ID before they went to the polling stations, and that's not what they're supposed to do. And they're almost blocking the doors.
Not allowed to.
And they're not allowed to do that, but it's also difficult to police it as well. So I know, you know, in Huntingdonshire, I know Ollie was going around as one of the polling station inspectors, but you can't be everywhere and at one time. And I just think that people don't understand what their role is. I always find it a bit intimidating having people with rosettes outside of a polling station, because actually I don't want to discuss, you know, who I voted for. Yeah, and that they're not there to ask that question anyway, but people think that they are, and I think that whole system, yeah, it benefits political parties who've got the resources to get people out and drive them to polling stations, but it's not a big part of democracy, and I don't think there's any need to have,
I mean,
people in rosettes outside polling stations. I don't.
It's worth stressing that the main reason that people are there, the tellers are there at the polling stations, is to take your electoral number so that they know that you voted. That's basically it, and it allows them to go back to a big headquarters and say, and cross your name off a list. So it means if they're knocking on doors and chasing people up and trying to get people out to vote, they can miss you out because they know you voted. There's another point to it, though, and this is why I sat outside a couple of polling stations during my election, just for a little while during busy times. And that is that sometimes seeing that party rosette or whatever as the last thing you go in makes a difference. And so sometimes that presence makes a difference as well. But it's right, you know, and if people don't like tellers at polling stations, my advice to you is read the rules, see what they can and can't do, and make sure they're operating within those rules. So when they ask for your number, they're entitled to ask for your number, but they are not allowed to demand it. And sometimes that happens, you know, and you're entitled, when you go up and say, "Can I have your number, please?" to say you're not having it.
But people don't know. People don't know, and people don't know that there's a choice, and they almost feel like they're officials outside, and people will just give them numbers, even though it makes them feel uncomfortable as well. You, so luckily for me, one of my polling stations was in Church Walk, where we, apart from Alex has not been there, but David, Martin, and I have all frequent a bar called Shoom, which was straight outside the polling station. So I was sat there quite happily for a few hours, drinking beautiful beer. Like at 10 o'clock in the morning, people were like, "I'm not going to vote for Ferguson because he's drinking on a polling day." But that was really quite nice, and that definitely, I agree, that kind definitely helps, because people see you and they'll come out and say, "I voted for you." I went to the St. Neots Festival over the weekend, and about 8,000 people told me they voted for me. I'm like, you can't all have voted for me.
It's worth saying, Stephen, there are people that would have voted for you because you were drinking on polling day. To be fair,
but the only acceptable activity to do on polling day is to knock on doors. I'm sorry, but like drinking beer, especially at 10 o'clock, is not acceptable on polling day.
So there's a myth, isn't there, that polling that campaign is not allowed on polling day, and it's not true. But again, that's diminishing returns as well, because, like, you know, lots of people have been out and voted at 7 o'clock, and throughout the day there's fewer and fewer people. If you've got logistics, I can kind of understand, and you're chasing every vote. But for somebody like me without logistics, it's impossible to do. And so I visited 10 or 11 polling stations. I went inside. Thank the polling clerks, because as Martin said, lots of them are working all day, and they're all lovely people. And I also, luckily, I met David Lawton, who used to be the Lib Dem. He was telling a Lib Dem MP for Cambridge, and spent like 15 minutes telling me what a rotten job it was and how I'd be lucky not to get elected. Which that really cheered me up, because he was such a sweet man, and also one of the things to consider when you're getting your ass kicked at the count as well.
Yeah, I think on the issue of tellers, I just seeing some of the comments. I think for me, like, I'm not so much against the idea. I think it's the issue of how it's approached. And I've been, as a political person, sitting on polling stations for different elections, many elections in the past, and I actually felt, you know, uncomfortable myself as a teller to ask that question, although you have to, like, you know, at least try to get the information, so as Martin says, you cross out the people who vote. But I've been on polling stations with other colleagues from other parties who I have observed how super insistent some people are, and I can totally get how this makes people uncomfortable. Like, I once sat with someone, like, years ago at the polling station, who was literally chasing, even if people say like no, or they try to ignore you, you know, like, she was like really, really persistent with, like, you know, please tell me that's something that you shouldn't do. And so someone who has been in the situation, like, I kind of just very gently ask, and I feel like really awkward and uncomfortable to, like, put pressure on people. But yeah, some people are super persistent with that, and I have seen that in action.
The first time I did telling was at a polling station in Somerset, where people, I think, were very used to it, and were surprised. I think the main surprise was that I was a new face doing it, because they expected it to be the same people every time. It was like, "Oh, has Colin died then?" but they would go and they automatically went and gave their polling card on the way out to the party that they voted for. I think it does it's something that used to happen more and in more places. And I think was seen as normal, and people understood what it was. And I think that's probably true where you have a more settled population, and you're not giving it to some randomer in a rosette. You're giving it to the infamous Colin, and that I think is different. I think there is a reason for it, and I think an entirely legitimate reason. But I think you do get over enthusiastic tellers, and also there's a lot of potential for miscommunication and so on. So I do wonder if it's there's also the policing issue, because frankly, the polling clerks should have better things to do on the day, than dealing with an over enthusiastic. I do think it is over enthusiasm, but over enthusiastic party volunteers standing outside polling stations.
I think it's too open to abuse. And like, so Raymond's my neighbour. Yeah, he didn't vote in the general election. He did campaign for me, and he posted leaflets. He didn't vote because he's Dutch, and so he's having a pretty shit week, if we're honest, with football and stuff. But like, most people don't understand, do they? Most people, it's for lots of people, it's a once every 5 years, because not everybody votes at local elections. And some people find it quite intimidating, I think, and so I quite serious, and I think that it should be banned, because I don't think it's helpful, and because it's abused so widely, and you can't police it.
I'm not a fan of banning things, but the point Raymond makes, and the reason I mentioned on here the fact that you should check up. I'm not saying everybody should do it, because what Raymond says is absolutely right. Not everybody's going to read up about how polling tellers should behave. But the people that watch this podcast are the sort of people that might, and that's why I said it. But there's one of the point about intimidation is really important. If you go back to the mayor of Tower Hamlets, who was kicked out of office because he basically abused the electoral system, and the report, if you read the report into his conduct, one of the factors within that was intimidation at polling stations. And there were sort of 15 people at polling stations, sort of intimidating people and stuff like that, and it got quite. A lot of people were absolutely intimidated, and it's that sort of stuff that we need to avoid, and that does give reason to ban it. I wouldn't ban it, but I would try and make sure people understood what they were and weren't entitled to do.
I mean, the things on that, I think that was pretty clearly a deliberate attempt to intimidate people. I think the other thing is people can intimidate people accidentally. They don't mean to, but particularly if you're if this is the 147th election you've done or whatever, it's you can see how, oh no, this is just how it worked. But somebody who's voting for the first time might not realize that, and it's a bit bit different, difficult.
Can I just say something on polling stations? So because up until this elections, I've always been I thought that they were quite, it's like going to church sometimes. You go in very quietly and you whisper to the polling clerks, and you go and you mark your paper in silence. And I hadn't realised till somebody said, go and thank all the polling clerks, so that you can hang around in the polling station and talk to the polling clerks. You don't have to get in and get out. In one polling station, they were making, because it's usually the kind of the old people's day centre, they were making old people cups of teas and stuff. And so all the polling clerks were lovely, and they like having a little conversation as well. If they're not rushed off their feet, if you go at one of the quieter times in the day. And so I really enjoyed every single conversation I had with those people was wonderful, and they were all really grateful for my support and saying thank you, and all just enjoying the experience, because it's part of the theatre of general elections, isn't it?
Yeah. And historically, when you say about going to church, historically people used to dress up and put on their Sunday clothes to go and vote as well, which there's less and less of a tendency to do that now.
So and there's lots of anecdotal effort of people who are kind of intimidated by tellers as well. So I think that's another good reason. Something we should talk about, certainly.
I mean, but the other thing is that it's with one exception in this podcast, it's quite easy if you're a big beardy bloke to forget that you're a big
Who's that
beardy
then?
bloke. I mean, personally, when I go to vote, what I fear personally is hyper-organized councillors with an incredible work ethic, standing there wondering, why did I put on this red headband this morning? But if I was thinking, it's like, if you were my mum and you came and saw me standing outside the voting station, she'd probably say, "What are you doing at a voting station in Dorset, David?" But you can see how that wouldn't be a huge amount of fun for people, and it can be unintentional. So I'm just going to close the curtain because I've realised how silhouetted I am.
If you dig far enough into Alex's TikTok stream, you will see TikToks of her with a beard. And my strong feeling is if she'd had a beard throughout this campaign, she would have got the extra 2,000 votes that would have got her elected. So I think it's only your own fault. I think the bearded Alex is much more credible to me.
It's only 1,499 by the way.
1,500.
Yeah, tough on shaving, tough on the causes of shaving. So, just going back to as you've all sort of done the campaigns recently, and this can be a sort of legislative thing, or just how campaigns are done. If there is anything that you could change about the electoral process, how we campaign, anything like not the sort of policies you stood on or how many people you've got available, but about the process. What do you think you would like to change?
I've got one if you like. So for me, I'd ban polling during the general election because I think the condition, the influence that has and the tactical voting websites over people's voting patterns, and you can see it at the count, is incredible. And I think that we've just talked about this before, and I've blogged about it as well. But the MRPs are not accurate. And MRP polls are not. They're not polls inside a constituency. Apart from some of them have 12 people will be interviewed in the constituency, and they have so much influence, and they're used by the big political parties, especially Lib Dems, who seem to base their whole career, the whole of their campaign around bar charts, into the whole only the Lib Dems or only Labour or only the Conservatives can win here. That kind of thing I think is really unhelpful because it ends up being self-reinforcing. Is that because people have a party has a lead in a not very good poll, which is based mainly on national factors, people are forced into voting for them. And the whole tactical voting thing for me, I used to do it myself, but being on the wrong end of it and seeing people who are not necessarily, I'm not talking about this constituency, but not necessarily the best candidate elected just because they're ahead in some poll, I think is not helpful. And I think in France and places, they ban polling during certain parts of the election. I think it would be better if we did that and let people vote with their conscience and try and vote for the best candidate. Because the MRP polls around here were so inaccurate that they don't make any sense, but they still people don't put the effort into understanding what's happening, and I think that they make voting decisions based on inaccurate data.
I would certainly ban.
Come back on that in a minute. So go ahead.
I would certainly ban polling and opinion polls in the last week because I think I actually think it had an impact in this election as well, where you see the polls close, towards the end of the campaign. A lot of that was people deciding they weren't going to vote Labour because they were going to get a massive majority. And the reality about what we do, and I agree with Stephen about what it does for tactical voting as well, because what you want people to do is go and vote for something. I don't want people going out and voting because they don't want something. And there was a lot of that in terms of how people tactical vote, but that's also why the biggest change I would make is PR. But I think that's too big a topic to cover here.
How many seats did Lib Dems win in this election? Was it 71 or something ridiculous? So I would argue that lots of those seats, it's probably not fair to them, and there's nobody on here, but were due to people not wanting tactically voting because they didn't want a Conservative, which is fine. Yeah, but we didn't get that many Conservatives anyway, and I think it would have been a good opportunity to elect better candidates. People like Alex, of course.
I mean, on polling as well, I think my main concern is actually how it affects turnout, which anyway is, in my view, ridiculously low for a general election, especially
in Huntingdon.
Here.
What was yours?
Yeah.
What was yours? 58.
I think, was it 60? 67%. Anyway, it was much lower than 2019 and like previous elections. But I think it's exactly what you do when you either say, well, Labour will win this super majority. And I had like, there were conservative adverts like on Facebook, like during the day being like, stop the super majority. And like that kind of thing, when people already assume like, oh, well, Labour will win anyway. Like, let's not vote and let's not bother. But it's the same when you have kind of inaccurate MRP polling. So there was one famous poll, which was like 16 points ahead for Labour in Huntington. And I was telling people, there is absolutely no way. Like, there is no way that you can have a 16% Labour lead in Huntington. Please trust me. Like, you know, like I've been canvassing in this area. And, you know, I actually had this conversation on the doorstep. Someone's like, oh, you're like so far ahead. Like, it doesn't really matter if we go vote. And I was like, well, it does, because it is close. And like those kind of like those MRP polls that rely on like national trends don't take into account local factors, don't take into account how much the parties actually campaign, because constant canvassing can lead to results. It's very different to have a conservative candidate doing zero campaigning and a conservative candidate doing everyday campaigning for like months. So like that kind of thing, as well as the fact, you know, that other local factors, like, you know, like Stephen said, like independent standing, what type of independence they are, like how the local council politics and their decisions affects the voting pattern. But yeah, my main concern is how it affects turnout. And I have seen this, like some people like not voting or say like, oh, why should I be bothered? You know, Labour will win anyway, and kind of like assuming just because we have a Labour government means we have a Labour MP in every single seat, which is, yeah, obviously not true at all.
I mean, I think there is a thing here though that I'm slightly going to call you up on. The MRPs are I think the issue is with how people interpret MRPs. I mean, if we want, we can at some point we can go through the maths of how they're done. They are robust. You know, they're subject to polling errors like everything else, but they are a model of how the electorate is going to work. The model makes, like any model, makes certain assumptions, and I think it would be better if people said, look, this is our best estimate. I think people place too much weight on the MRPs. But I'll be honest. I think that, you know, there is an issue where you have an independent that they can't capture those.
Yeah, I mean,
they can't capture the local history of an area.
Yeah.
So they're not.
Sorry, I'm going to challenge that, David. They can capture it. They can ask if they're going to vote independent as an option. They don't.
No, they don't. No, they don't, because MRP polls don't, because they're only basically polling a handful of people in each constituency. So I think it's like YouGov is like 35 people in minimum in a constituency, but then they're doing that across all the constituencies and mapping it back onto demographic factors. So what they don't do is they're mapping national trends, yeah, with a very small amount of local data. What they don't do is they don't respect, going back to the tactical voting thing, they don't respect the strength of the individual candidates or their campaigns. So all of the hustling stuff, you know, which is minimal anyway, but you know, there was one of the candidates in my constituency, and not me necessarily, who I think ran a really bad campaign. None of that will be reflected in MRP polls, apart from the 35 people who might understand it, because it's basically a regional issue, and you can't do that for independents. You know, so I think in Jeremy Corbyn's constituency, they did constituency level polling, but that costs about 25 grand to do, and you can't do that. Well, you can't do it within election spending limits, but it's also just too expensive. So it's a massive disadvantage to independent candidates and also to smaller parties as well, I think. And it's one of those things. I mean, you know, I got my ass kicked. I understand now how big that mountain is to climb, but it's one of the things that you can't get over. That was my idea. Anyway, anybody else got any ideas about what the things?
I would ban candidates from saying that's not what I'm hearing on the doorstep.
Yeah. There's lots of bullshit about that as well. I'm not going to. Maybe Alex was knocking on doors, but I don't. You see the candidates about, and not many people are knocking on as many doors as you think they are. Because it's not unless you've got the tactical stuff, it's not very good use of time, is it? It isn't.
I had it said to me by a Conservative about the campaign in Northeast Cambridgeshire, okay, and I sat listening to it and said, yeah, you're doing exactly what every other politician does. You say that because it gives you an opportunity to put your point of view as valid. That's what you're doing it. It's not because what you're saying is true.
Well, and famously, the Labour candidate around here, who was is a parrot, who came up from London, basically sat in a cafe in St Neots and said that she's hearing overwhelmingly on the doorstep that people are complaining about Lib Dem council when we don't have a Lib Dem council. And so straight up, that's like, you know, that shows you don't understand where you are, and you haven't been talking to people on the doorstep, because literally nobody's. I said nobody's saying that. I'm very doubtful that anybody would blame anything on Lib Dem council around here, because most people don't understand who runs any of the councils, let alone the fact that it's not the Lib Dems.
I want to bring on this point, like as we were opening the conversation about misconceptions about elections. I do knock on doors and I enjoy it, and I knocked on doors in a lot of elections that are not mine, like helping like many candidates across the country, not only the Eastern region. So I did like thousands of doors, like many thousands. But the thing that I would say, one of the misconceptions is, because I did a lot of door knocking in the campaign, as much as I could within like the 3 months I was selected as a candidate. You cannot possibly door knock effectively at every door in the constituency. Like even when you have like a target seat campaigning and have plenty of volunteers and people from the outside, it is like almost impossible to be able to have that contact. Even some of the most highly canvassed areas, like areas in Cambridge City and so on, maybe a bit over half or like 60% of people were like spoken to on the doorstep. So it's very, I got like those emails saying like, well, you were in St. Ives, for example, why haven't you knocked on my door? Well, because realistically, like if I'm a day there, maybe I can like have about, I don't know, 40 conversations max, like especially if I'm like a long time on the doorstep, because I also don't want to be on the door and be like, okay, what's your issue, like 1 minute, and then like, okay, thank you very much, bye-bye. I actually want to engage. And if you think door knocking can actually persuade people, you want to spend more than like 20 seconds on a door actually discussing something with the person there. So realistically speaking, even if you are, let's say you are lucky enough to have enough holiday leave, which I didn't, but let's say you take 6 weeks completely off of work and do door knocking every day, like 8-hour shift, 10-hour shift, it is still not possible to knock on every single door in the constituency.
There's 50,000 doors in the constituency, and you just can't.
I have to say, for my by-election, I didn't knock on any doors, and it's one of the things with hindsight I wish I'd done, because I could have picked up a different. I might have picked up a different vibe, and I think that's what's sort of important. Is if you get your door knocking right, you're definitely not going to knock on every door, but you can get a bit of a vibe in areas where you think your vote should be. You'll get a sense that actually that feels about right, and it feels better than I expected, and that's the thing that I think you get. As well as understanding where your core vote is, it's that thing about understanding that the national message it's the same as the local message, but then you turn around and say that's not what I'm hearing on the doorstep. So.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry, go on.
No, all I was going to say is I think it's something like 50, more. Let's say it's 50,000 doors in a constituency. If you spend 1 minute at each door with no time waiting for people to answer the door, and no time moving between doors, that's 5 weeks. So it's like in a 6 week and it's one that's slightly was like, why didn't you knock on my door? And it's like because it's impossible. We can't knock on every door, and realistically you've got to get to an area where you're door knocking, and then there's there's sometimes I was out door knocking for you, Alex. Sometimes it's a polite no thank you, I'm not voting for you, fair enough, whatever. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I might do, but also while you're here, can I talk to you about X and what do you think about this and so on. And you can sometimes spend sort of 10-20 minutes, and it's like if people want to have those 10-20 minute conversations, which is great, it also means that you can't get to every door. You just can't. Sorry, Alex, I cut across you.
Do some people not enjoy people knocking on their doors? Because, if I'm having a kip on the sofa, and it's anything other than the Amazon man, and he's got some goodies for me, I'll forgive him or her. But if it's somebody else knocking on the door and I don't want to talk to them, if it's a political person, I would quite enjoy it because it's me. But most people must be like, I don't knock on my door because people don't do that anymore. Do you not find that as well sometimes?
I think I found quite the opposite, because I think in areas that are overly canvassed, which I worked on elections where the areas have been like overly canvassed, and people are like, oh, not again, you're the 4th person turning up this week, and it's really, really difficult to get the engagement. But actually, like, my experience in Huntington has been most like, well, you're the first person who knocked on my door this election, or like we don't really see people knocking on doors, and especially in areas that perhaps don't benefit from much of this active campaigning. Like when I was in some of the villages, for example, you get a lot of that. It's actually nice to get to speak to someone face to face. Whereas perhaps like, campaigning in some more metropolitan areas in the past where people are really used to door knocking and campaigning and that kind of doorstepping, sometimes it's like, oh, like not again, like, I had the Lib Dem candidate and the Green and the Tory and everyone else, and now it's you again this week. And it kind of gets a bit tiring, and then people are more tempted to say like, no thank you, I had enough political chat. I was asked 4 times this week, so what are the local issues that matter to you this election? So I'm not going to answer.
I mean, I would also say that in terms of the functioning of the democracy, that a few people, perhaps more than a few people, don't like people knocking on the doors. Being blunt about it, I just think, so what? This is about, no, I do. I think it's about the functioning of our democracy, to be honest. And politicians out engaging with people is an important part of our democracy. And so if some people don't like it, well, they can go and do one.
On that same point, do you
Martin
post?
Curtis was an independent candidate at the recent election.
On the same point, there, do you post leaflets through letterboxes saying no junk, no flyers? Like, that's always a difficult question.
Yes, because political election material is not junk mail.
Well, some of the leaflets around here, mate, were. I can tell you. For sure.
I mean,
it's a bit difficult because you might piss people off, mightn't you? And I suppose they're not going to vote anyway.
I had it happen, in which case I apologize and like really sorry. Like, I think an election leaflet about any candidate, whichever party or independent, is an information material. Like, I think people should have an informed choice when they vote. But yeah, it happened to me sometimes. One person actually opened the door and said, "I don't want this." It's like, well, I'm really sorry. Like, I'll take it back for you. Thank you. Have a good day. And like, just apologize for it. But I think actually it happened to me the other way around. I was actually in my county division, and there was this door with like a big sign saying like, "Don't door knock, like go away." It was like actually a sign saying like, "Go away, no junk, no anything." And I was leafleting with like a letter I was doing, just updating on my work as a county councillor. Like every year I do this kind of like summary letter for my county activity, and I skipped that door because it was just this huge sign saying like, "Go away." I usually post onto the no junk ones, and this man came out saying like, "Oh, why are you avoiding my door?" And I said like, "Well, I'm just delivering this. You had the sign saying go away, no leaflets, no anything." So no, but I'm very interested about like what the local council is doing. And I'm like, all right, sorry then, please have on. And I think it can happen the other way around as well.
Yeah. Did anybody else have the same as I did, which is that as you deliver a leaflet, you stick it through the letterbox, and as you're walking away, it's being stuck back through the letterbox back towards you?
No, I had a few times in different areas. Yes.
Yeah, it does happen. The other thing is, I think there's something that could, and I'll say this just generally for anyone who is buying a door, please don't buy a door with a post box 2 inches off the ground. I'm old and fat. It's quite hard for me to bend over that much. Ideally, if you could do one without the furry bits. I particularly like the ones that are a box on the outside of the wall. Very easy to do.
Especially if you've got a long driveway and a gate. Yeah, if I'm going to go through, quite often I've gone through gates, walked 300 yards up a path, and I still can't find the post box. Like, if you're going to have a gate, have one of those mailboxes on the outside, because I will love you forever. I love little mailboxes, don't you?
I remember. One of the things I did was I looked around for a mailbox, couldn't find one. Walked down the drive. There's no post box, no nothing. Walk back, and as I'm walking out the gate, I see the mailbox, and that's just that's 100 steps I didn't need to do.
Look, it all seems there can be risk. I mean, I had one unpleasant interaction with a particularly with a particular person during this election, but. A friend of mine, Paul Bergin, on election day got bitten quite badly by a staffy. It's not a risk-free activity. It is low risk, but you're going and putting yourself out there. I'm aware of the time. I thought maybe just do a couple of questions. There's one here from Andrew.
Yeah.
Should candidates have to show photo ID to register? I'm guessing this is with reference to were all of the Reform Party candidates actual real people. All I'll say on this is this seems to have come because there was one photo of a candidate that was edited with AI. The candidate does exist. He's been on telly. And did say I did edit it with AI to change the color of my tie and a few other things, and it looked a bit AI. I'm not sure there's actually. It's not clear to me yet whether there is a here, or whether they just had a lot of candidates who were, very much paper candidates. But what do people think on showing for the impact of having to show ID was to vote?
I don't know, but it's ridiculous that we have to that you have to show ID to vote, but not to register as a candidate. And I don't think that happened here. I'm fairly convinced it didn't happen, but it's open to abuse, isn't it? It really is. Oh look, Martin's got a thumbs up on the screen. So you say, yeah, it doesn't seem there are enough hurdles to get through to get your name down and be an official candidate that adding a passport check to them wouldn't make any difference. And I think it's ridiculous that we require people to show photos to vote, but not to register as candidates.
I'm actually a fan of photo ID for elections, and I know there was a big uproar about it, when it was introduced. But my view is you should have to identify yourself as when you vote. I don't have a problem with it, but what Stephen just said, I absolutely agree with. I would make candidates show ID.
And how do people feel about postal voting? I'll tell you what, the postal votes came to. It's very easy to vote by post now, and I realised what the postal votes came for me and my other half on the same day. I work from home. My wife has a real job. Not that working from home isn't a real job. It's like it would have been so easy for me to fill it out and drop it off.
Yeah.
And equally, if you knew Alice, you can guess how well that would have gone down if I had done that. But it does strike me there is the potential for abuse with those.
Especially for political parties as well. So quite often political parties will gather up postal votes and say, "Don't send them back to us
anymore."
I know that, and that there were still. I think there's a limit that candidates are only allowed to drop off 5 postal votes, but before that was open to manipulation as well. So yeah, again, I mean, I think postal votes are useful, but I think they're overused. Kerry on the screen now was campaigning for me, so these are all my fault, and so I apologise to her. She leafleted endlessly for me and was fantastic. Thank you, Kerry.
I mean, on the postal votes, the thing is, I've worked right with so I'm going to take Caroline's thing. Postal votes are essential, easy for people who work away. So I've had a postal vote since for some time now because I never knew where I was going to be on election day. Postal fraud is minuscule. I'm not sure we know that because and I'm not saying it's huge. It's a difficult one to assess. Is the issue there? But the other thing is there may be other ways of solving those problems that are worth considering. I think I'm right in saying in Australia they have the polling stations open for quite a long time, so they're not just open for one day. This is particularly because obviously it's a massive country that's very rural, and so you only might go to a town once a month if you're in the outback. But things like that, or voting at the weekend and so on, might help. I just raise it just to see what people think.
I mean, I wonder if there's some different things you can do, because one of the things with the elderly, particularly, and I'll give you an example. With sort of my dad is 85, and my dad went out to vote, and I took him to vote, but my dad's quite frail, and he wanted to go out and vote because he likes to. I think he's at last admitted he needs a postal vote. But is there something you could do as an example with something like care homes, where you actually effectively set up just for a couple of hours a polling station in a care home so that people can actually vote in person if they want to? There's things you could do that are different to try and take the emphasis away from postal voting, but I don't think you're going to get rid of it.
No, I don't think get rid of it, but we've gone for postal voting is very easy, but I wonder if we've gone for it because it is the easy option.
Yeah, I think there are definitely reasons for which you should be kept, like the comment mentioned, people who, work away, especially if you have the election, polling day only on one day, obviously like people who are disabled and so on. So like there are obviously reasons for it. What concerns me really is what, the example that David was saying about like you being one person in the family kind of it being open for you to vote for everyone. And I'm a very big believer in like kind of having your personal and informed vote, and in the freedom of doing that yourself. And I've seen, for example, like quite a bit campaigning a lot around the country, door knocking and being like, well, like X or Y in the family will decide for all of us. And that's fair enough if that's what you want to do. Like, that's not my opinion at all, but I think from a democratic point of view, like, it's not really fair if, like, let's say one person decides 8 postal votes in the household. I think that is something I'm not comfortable with as like a principle of how democracy should work in my view. And it's kind of facilitated if you have the control over, I guess, postal votes as opposed to person.
The question I have is, it seems likely that in the next 4 years, we're going to see an introduction of and a reduction in the voting age to 16, and it's just something that, as part of whatever bill enables that, that needs to be looked at, and they need to sit and look at who can have a postal vote and why. Because it does strike me as we're sort of accepting what was introduced in it was Blair's time, wasn't it? What was introduced then is sort of the status quo, and actually the reality is now's the time to re-examine it.
Yeah, the thing is, Caroline and Kerry in comments are making really great points. Caroline, basically, I wouldn't be able to vote in person on a normal work day. Same issue for me. I never knew where I was going to be. There's a real issue for, as Kerry says, for the with mobility and so on. Those are real issues that have to be taken into account.
And that not all the polling stations are properly accessible to people in wheelchairs. My mate Martin Sibley was complaining about that, and like, it's something I hadn't considered. You'd think that that would be a criteria for any polling station, but lots of them are, especially in villages, are village halls with gravel parks and small doors. So that's also
my
wife would struggle to vote because she's mucking me out at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I should say, talking of partners, there was one. I'm not sure how Alice voted in a particular election some years ago, but I was a candidate, and I'm fairly sure she didn't actually vote for me. So the chances of me telling Alice how she's going to vote, minimal. I think we should probably wrap it up there, as we've been on for an hour.
Can I give a shout out to Sally? Because Sally is a councillor in Oxford. She used to be a Lib Dem and part of the joint administration, but now she's independent. It might be fun to get on her one week. For somebody from the less fashionable university town at the other end of the Oxford Cambridge Arc would be fantastic. So hi to Sally, and we'll get her on, because they've had quite a lot of trouble, haven't they, with 15-minute cities and low traffic neighbourhoods. Yeah, we think we've had a bad time with the STZ. Yeah, it's been even worse. We'll try and get
more controversial things. There are more controversial things than the STZ, definitely. So we should debate those.
Sorry, David. Wrap up.
So we'll wrap up there. So my thank you to everybody who's joined us. I think everybody who went and
65. It's almost like the star of the show is back or something.
Yeah. If we can get one more viewer. Come on, one more viewer. Thank you to everybody who took part in the elections, particularly to the 3 candidates on this show.
Let's not push you out of this, David. I think you did a great job as well, and you played a good role as well, and we shouldn't forget it.
But it's easy. I'm happy to go and knock on doors and so on, but it's a bit less high profile. Anyway. So thank you to Stephen, Alex, and Martin. We will be back next week, same time, same place, or I should say same bat time, same bat place. If you have ideas for topics you would like us to discuss, do please let any of us know. Usual thing: Facebook, email, telepathic communication. And with that, goodbye, and see you all out there. Have a good day.
See you later.
See you soon.